Good morning. This is Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationship Show. My goal is to bring a fresh perspective to you on all things related to how humans develop their individual brilliance while navigating the excitement, stickiness, and resistance in their relationships. In my 40 years of working as a psychotherapist and consultant, I have been continually amazed at the ways in which people overcome challenges. I hope to share my experience and insights today so you can find magic in your relationships. So today, first of all, I forgot to put my headphones in. We had a little bubbly start today, so I'm just going to have to do this so that we get the good sound. Great. So today, my guest is Dr. Julie Pham. She is, what would I say? I know she'll describe herself, but let me try. So she's more than a community organizer. She's more than a community activist. She's more than a community consultant. She's a scholar of communities, and I think she brings a very interesting and unique perspective on how people can work together in diverse groups. So today we're going to be talking about how relationships with her family and community have shaped her life and work. She is the author of a recently released book, 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communication and relationships at work, which we will be discussing later in the show. So Dr. Julie, I'm going to just read her bio and then we'll dive in. Dr. Julie Pham is the founder and the CEO of Curiosity Based, an organizational development firm based in Seattle. She is the author of the #1 Amazon new release and bestseller, 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communication and relationships at work. Dr. Pham has been recognized with numerous awards for her community leadership. She has applied her community building approach to building strong, collaborative, and curious teams. Julie was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and raised in Seattle. Dr. Pham earned her PhD in history at Cambridge University as a Gates Cambridge Scholar, and she graduated magna cum laude from the University of California, Berkeley, as a Haas Scholar. She earned her real-life MBA by running her family's Vietnamese language newspaper during the 2008 to 2010 recession. She has worked as a journalist, historian, university lecturer, marketer, nonprofit executive, and management consultant. So, Julie, let's dive in. I really would like you to start by telling us about your family's experience coming to the United States, your family's story, and how it set you up for your career and your return to Seattle.
Mercy, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. I'm really excited to be here with you this morning. So I came to the U.S. with my parents as a 2-month-old baby. We came as boat people from Vietnam. My father had served in the South Vietnamese military, and then after the war ended, he was sentenced to a communist prison camp for 3 years. And so after that experience, he was just, we need to leave. And so that has been a really big influence on my worldview. So we came to
Julie, could you just for a moment, I want to explain to the audience because I am old enough so that I was in college during the Vietnam War, but much of our audience is a lot younger. Can you explain to them how you immigrated? There were people who got on planes. Your family did not get on a plane.
Yes.
Can you explain that difference to us?
Yeah. So after the war ended in 1975, there was the fall of Saigon, and some people were able to be airlifted out of the country. And those people usually had much more connections. And actually, we were supposed to leave by boat. And my father had served in the Navy, but we weren't able to get the family together in time to be able to leave when Saigon fell. And then for basically a decade afterwards, there were waves and waves of boat people. And so for boat people, that means that we actually escaped by boat illegally. And it was very dangerous. My family was actually, we were the first ones in the family to leave. And my aunts and uncles tried to leave the week after, and they were caught. And so many people were caught. Many people tried again and again. And then later on, once there was enough of a refugee community, we were able to actually sponsor families to come over. And there was also a law that was passed that allowed for a U.S. law that allowed for people who were South Vietnamese who served in these prison camps to actually come to the U.S. legally and to sponsor their families.
How old were you when your family was on the boat?
I was 2 months old, so I don't remember anything.
Old. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So, so your family came, and they came directly to Seattle?
We came directly to Seattle, landed in Seattle, and then went to Florida. And my dad, that's where the sponsor was. And my dad said that he walked around for a weekend and realized he couldn't stay there. And so he borrowed money to come back to Seattle, where there was a very welcoming Vietnamese community. And Mercy, I actually want to explain something. A lot of people think that the term boat people is derogatory. They hear, oh, boat people, that's and actually within the Vietnamese community, boat people, being a boat person is a source of pride, because like we escaped. Right. And that took a lot of courage. And so it was a difference in perspectives of how for sometimes when I talk to Americans about the war, it's, oh, we're so sorry what we did to your country. And then I have to explain, we were fighting together, right? We were on the same side. And there was a reason why we left Vietnam. And so, and that we don't see ourselves as victims.
Well, that's really important perspective, right? I think it's really important for people to hear that. And so when your family came, then what did they do in Seattle? How did they establish themselves?
So my parents tried to deliver newspapers, deliver pizzas, went back to school. I have 2 younger brothers who were born in Tacoma, Washington. So my mom actually wasn't able to finish her degree. They had actually both met in law school in Vietnam, and they knew they wouldn't be able to practice law in the U.S. And so my dad actually went back to study engineering, and he got his engineering degree. And then in the mid 1980s, the Vietnamese community was really growing in Seattle and also just throughout the U.S. And so they saw a need for a newspaper, and there was actually a big Vietnamese newspaper in Southern California, where that's actually the largest population of Vietnamese in the US. And so my parents decided to start a newspaper to serve the growing Vietnamese community. And my dad eventually left his job once he was financially able to do so. And so I grew up with this newspaper. And I like to think of it as my parents were hustlers among hustlers, serving entrepreneurs, serving a very entrepreneurial community.
So so as a child, you were watching all of this, and you then you stepped into what we call an educational pathway that was really, not surprisingly ambitious, right? And really quite very high achieving. Can you tell us, I'd just like to hear a little bit more about what your experience was watching your parents, and then thinking about who you were as a Vietnamese woman, as an American. How were you formulating who you were going to be?
Growing up, as a child, there's just things that by intuition, was like, okay, I do this at school and I do this at home. And it's not like I was able to articulate that. And it wasn't until later on as an adult where I realized, like, oh, they're just different ways to communicate, different expectations around how we treat one another. And so actually, my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. And so when I went to college, I thought that's what I was going to do. And it wasn't really until I got to college did I start to get more curious actually about their experience and about the experience of our community. So even though I grew up with the newspaper, it was just felt like a backdrop. And it wasn't until I started to study it formally and started to actually interview many South Vietnamese military veterans did I understand and really appreciate the different perspectives. Because quite honestly, when I was in college, I was first learning about the Vietnam War the way Americans saw it. And as it being between Vietnamese and Americans, and the Vietnamese were de facto the North Vietnamese, and the South Vietnamese weren't the real authentic Vietnamese. And so then I would talk to my dad and his friends. It was like, oh, there's a different perspective. And so in that, I mean, I chose to study history because I realized that there's so many different, it's actually just about learning those different perspectives. And it's not that there is a right or wrong, there's just difference.
Right. So this was in your undergraduate work?
This was in my undergraduate work. And then I decided when I was a senior, there was an opportunity, a new scholarship had opened up with the possibility of studying at Cambridge. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to get my PhD in history. And I really thought I was going to be an academic. I really believed that my path was to go and help and to be a historian, to help people see these different perspectives. And so then for the next decade, essentially all of my 20s, I worked towards getting this PhD and doing this research. And I then realized that I actually, as I was finishing my dissertation, I realized I didn't want to stay in academia. And I did all the things that academics are supposed to do. I published, I taught, I managed an academic journal, and I realized I didn't want to stay in academia. And I realized I wanted to go into business. And so,
that's a big shift.
Yeah, it was a big shift. And it was,
you went to Berkeley after Cambridge, is that correct?
No, I went to Berkeley first. So Berkeley and then Cambridge
first. You had a fellowship there first, right?
Yeah.
And then can just tell us a little bit about your research. This is,
So for my master's, I studied British colonialism in Burma. And then and the bureaucrats, and then I realized I wasn't going to be able to learn Burmese because it's a very difficult language. And so then I started. Then my PhD was a study of a South Vietnamese communist revolutionary, Jen Van Zo. He actually led the 1945 revolution in Saigon. And so I wrote a biography about him, and I was actually able to interview him 16 times before he passed away.
Wow.
So and then again, that was a very different perspective, right? Because then I was studying the communist perspective, and I just the kind of history that I studied was actually those who I was very interested in the way history is written. So not just about the actors, but also the actors as historians, because actually that figure became a leading communist historian.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so much there in terms of even the narratives that we create, which is, I think, what you stumbled on initially, right? Was that this story you were hearing in history, which is supposed to be objective and academic, didn't match.
Yeah.
Your experience or your family's perspective. And yeah, I think that's to me, that's really fascinating. So you decided not to stay in academia. We could go on about that, but and so you decided to go back to Seattle. Is that correct?
Yes, I decided to go back to Seattle. It was 2000. It was the end of 2008, and my brother asked, "Hey, can you help out with the newspaper?" My brother was working at the newspaper at the time, and I realized that I wanted to spend time with my parents as adults. And I knew that if I spent that time working in the family newspaper, I would never regret it later on.
Right.
And so that's what I did. I came back to Seattle and I got my real life MBA. By working at the newspaper, I had to learn how to sell, how to market, how to raise money, and all of these things that as an academic, I had no idea how to do. Right. And though I think as an I think what I'm good at is learning. The confidence of, well, I don't know how to do this, but I will learn how to do this.
But I'll figure it out. I'll learn how to do it. One thing that interests me, so I'm going to ask you a little bit about it, was this experience of coming back and relating to your parents as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is really critical in adult development. It's a big transition going from feeling like a child or acting, which people sometimes do their whole adult
Mm-hmm.
lives. They never actually establish that. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
A huge change was by then I spoke Vietnamese. So growing up, I actually didn't speak Vietnamese. I was a latchkey kid. It was a period of assimilation. And so when I lived in Vietnam and I did my academic research, I learned Vietnamese. And so that was a huge shift in our relationship too. And so I went from only speaking English to speaking in Vietnamese and also editing my parents' English emails and realizing
Mm-hmm.
how limited their English was. And also appreciating how charismatic they were to be able to communicate despite limited English. And so it helped me deepen, have a whole new appreciation from what my parents were able to achieve once I also understood what it was like to learn another language.
Exactly, yes.
So,
yeah, I have this experience. I lived in France for a year and studied French, and in an area where not many people spoke English. And when I meet someone with an accent, I'm always talking to them about their English and how they learned it and what an accomplishment it is. Because we, as Americans, take that for granted. We just expect that people will pick it up without knowing what the process is like. So, Julie, it's time for us to take a break. This is Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationship Show. My guest today is Dr. Julie Pham. And when we come back, we'll be talking about how she dove into the community in Seattle. She's the author of a book, 7 Forms of Respect, which we'll get to talk about later in the show. Thank you.
All right. I'll clear you too. Did you want to stay chatting or?
Yeah, we can stay chatting.
Okay.
So, Julie.
Alternative Talk 1150. We're on your radio at 1150 a.m. We're on your HD radio at 98.9 Channel 3.
So many ways to listen.
We're on the web at 1150kknw.com, streaming live audio and video as well as MP3 archives of many of our shows.
So many ways to listen.
And now, we're on your smartphone or tablet. Download our free app in the Apple App Store or Google Play and take Alternative Talk 1150 anywhere you go.
So many ways to listen.
Hi, tune into my new show, The Remarkable Relationship Show, with me, Mercy Russell. I bring a fresh perspective on all things related to how humans develop their individual brilliance while navigating the excitement, stickiness, and resistance in their relationships. Wednesdays from 9 to 10 a.m. And you can visit my website at leadershipwithmercy.com.
When I was in Iraq, our convoy was hit. It was bad. After I came home, I could still hear booms and see tracer fire. Makes it hard to be a good mom.
As America's veterans face challenges, DAV is there.
I'm Naomi Mathis, Air Force veteran.
With the right support, more veterans can reach victories, great and small.
With help from DAV, I was able to begin to heal.
DAV provides a lifetime of support to veterans of every generation, helping more than 1 million veterans each year.
Today, I'm part of DAV. We're veterans helping veterans to get the benefits they've earned. And I give my veterans my all.
But there's more to be done and more victories to be won.
My victory is being able to be here for my children.
Naomi Mathis, thank you for your service. May your victories inspire many more. Support more victories for veterans. Go to DAV.org.
Get your daily dose of variety. Alternative Talk 1150.
All right, here we go. Stand by.
Good morning. This is Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationship Show, and I'm here today with Dr. Julie Pham, the author of a newly released book, 7 Forms of Respect. And today we're talking about her background as a Vietnamese American woman And is that appropriate to say
Yes. Mhm.
about you? Okay.
Yes, yes, that's how I describe myself. Yes.
Yeah. So we've just been talking about her experience, her family's experience, and her experience, and her, sort of education and her interests, and then coming back to live with her parents, not live with them, but to work with them in their family business with a Vietnamese language newspaper. So you and I in the break started talking about your experience in your family business, but I'd like for you to talk more about that. And then, as you said, you kind of were getting your MBA, working there, learning everything on the ground that a business person would need to know. But then you continue to take that further from your family's business. So could you tell us more about that?
So yes, the real life MBA. This was where so when I came back to Seattle, it was 2008. This was the start of the worldwide recession and the start also the decline of newspapers, print newspapers everywhere.
Right.
And so this newspaper had put 3 kids through college, and now we were just, what is this? And are we ever going to recover? It was a really dark time, actually. And learning how to get really scrappy, actually. Mm-hmm. So coming back, I was just, I need to learn how to do business. And I want to do this through getting mentors. So I actually started to get mentors, to get business mentors. And I also got pulled into a lot of volunteering. Because being someone who is bicultural, bilingual, in an area where at the time the newspaper was located in the area where I was doing a lot of work, it was the most diverse zip code in the country, 98118. And so, so people started pulling me into leadership roles. And Mercy, it was really hard in the beginning because I went from academia, which is very solitary,
right?
very, very solitary, to working with people, to collaborating with people. And I had to work through people, right, to get things done. And I started to talk to other owners of ethnic media outlets and realizing we all had the same struggle. And even actually mainstream newspapers and mainstream media outlet too, all have the same struggle. Just like, how do we get through this? This is a really dark time. And so realizing that if we pull our resources and our connections, we could do more together. And so that was the start of the real life MBA of learning how to do partnerships, learning how to sell. Mercy, I remember the first time I talked to an ad agency and they were asking me all these questions and I had no idea how to answer. And when I got off the phone, I was just, I'm really bad at this. But in 2 years, I'll get good. And I did, I did. And so that was, and I think one of the big things I learned was community building and motivating people who had really no financial incentive to be together.
Right.
Working with a lot of volunteers. I got pulled onto these boards, these nonprofit boards. And I really think of those as my special courses, and I learned that when bringing people together from very different backgrounds, there's going to be friction that emerges that comes from just misunderstanding and miscommunication. I ended up creating a coalition of ethnic media outlets where we had 25 different organizations. We represented Russian, Spanish speaking, Mandarin, Somali, all of these different orgs. And there was friction that would come up, even though we all meant well. But, it's just like, I didn't like the way that they said that. Or can you believe they did that? And I had to learn how to navigate that. And there are many times where I was the one making the major mistake. There were definitely times where I was the one who had certain expectations and I was coming in and I had to learn how to build relationships because that was something that I didn't need to do as an academic.
Right. This is something that's always interested me. I went to social work school in Los Angeles in the 80s and at UCLA. And there was a lot of emphasis, in my program for working with, I think I took the course in working with Asian American, people from Asia, people from the Latinos and African Americans, right? Which, this was quite a long time ago. So, and at the time, for me, I'm from New England, right? So A is and the West Coast, Seattle, similar, huge melting pot of people from all over the Pacific theater, never mind the rest of the world. And one thing that stood out to me, and that I have had a very hard time actually communicating when I've gone back into when I went back to Vermont, for example, was the fact that those of us who are sort of white Americans are so, we blinders. We think it's that we just aren't aware of the fact that these differences exist among all cultures. Mm-hmm. It's not unique to us. Now, obviously, the role of white people in the world is a different topic, but it's not. It isn't the only difference.
Mm-hmm.
Not white. It's so many others, and that was really brought home to me because we really needed to understand that. And when we were working with people, that the Samoans and the Filipinos have a thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something I think most people really aren't aware of in terms, but it was such a, what would you say? It was such an important learning space for you in your experience, was beginning to be with these people with all these differences that are really innocent, right? Mm-hmm. They're not about the other person. They're really just about the worldview of the person of the two people.
Yes, it comes down to we all have expectations, right? We can't help it. We all have expectations. And we might not even realize that those expectations are not universal.
Right. Or be aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're so, that's what happened when I lived in France for a year, is I didn't even understand my biases until I ran into walls, right? And realized, I didn't realize I had an American accent.
Yes.
I thought I spoke English, right? And the British had an accent, right? And it's that kind of blinder. I've always really loved it when I've had that sort of perception broken through, but at any rate, I'm sure that was a really exciting time.
I'll just say, when I was an undergrad at Berkeley, there was something called the International House, where they're all the international students.
Uh-huh.
And then when I got to Cambridge, and when I was an undergrad, I'm like, oh, those are the international students. And then when I got to Cambridge, I was like, I'm an international student.
Now
I'm a foreigner here.
Right.
So
yeah, I could tell more stories about that in France. But let's go on. And so you were sort of working with your family's newspaper, and then immersed all of a sudden. Not all of a sudden, but pretty quickly into this sort of very rich community. But then you also took another turn into going to work for Microsoft.
Yes. So then after working at the newspaper for 3 years, I realized that I was working with 8 people. Half of them had the same last name as me, and I needed to move to a bigger organization so I could continue to learn. And so then I started networking, and I was able to network my way into Microsoft, and then into another tech company doing marketing. And then I spent the next 9 years in tech, essentially. And that was another language too. That was another world.
Absolutely.
Going from academia to then a newspaper, right? A print newspaper that serves a small niche audience, to Microsoft was like, all of those worlds were so different. And each time I had to learn to adjust, and because in each place there were the different expectations, different language, and so so then I made that, and then my last job, I was at a nonprofit that advocated on behalf of the tech industry. It's the best job I ever had. And then I decided in the middle of the pandemic to leave it, to start my own company. And the only reason why I would leave the best job I ever had was because I realized at that point I wanted to do something on my own. And you know, I think growing up with entrepreneurs who served entrepreneurs, I think that my risk tolerance was a lot higher. And I think so much of my worldview is shaped by a desire for freedom. And that goes back to what my parents fled Vietnam for.
Right. So how did you, so would you say your impetus to go in to develop your own business was really motivated more by wanting to be independent or by your particular mission in your business? Well, how would you?
Yeah, I think, Marcy, that's a great question. I think it was a bit both. So one of the things that I was working on at my last org was to facilitate and foster cross-sector collaboration. So I'd bring together people from tech, government, community-based organizations, and some even I even worked with labor unions too. So people from very different backgrounds, very different approaches to the way that we work and see the approach community building. And I was so fascinated by that. I was so fascinated by how do you collaborate across difference. And what I found was it came down to practicing curiosity. Those who were able to do well were those who were able to practice curiosity. And so I realized that that's what I want to do full time. I want to help people practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace, because that's where we actually spend most of our waking hours.
So is what you're referring to is that the individuals in these mixed groups, meaning mixed from different industries, frameworks, who did the best were people who were curious about others, as opposed to just sort of wanting to promote or persuade from their own point of view.
So they were the ones who were, so in the work, I would organize these teams and say, hey, you have 6 months to learn about the community, figure out what you want to do, build a project together. You have very limited resources, and then go build that. And so there were those who were so focused on a particular outcome. They weren't curious about any other possible outcomes. They were like, this is what we need to achieve. This is what success looks like. And then there were people on that same team who were just, oh my gosh, I'm learning so much. I'm trying new things. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. Like, look at what we're developing. Oh, it's not what we thought we were going to develop. That's okay. Right? It's still going to have impact. And so those people, the latter, were able to, at the end, feel so much better and happy about what they were doing versus those who were just, we didn't do what we set out to do. You know, and so it wasn't so much about promoting. It was more of like they had a very fixed mindset about what success looks like. And if they didn't get that, then they were disappointed versus those who were more open to look at all we've learned along the way. Look at all these new relationships we've built. And look, I am surprising myself. I didn't even know I could even think this or do this. Whereas others, there were some people who, those who were very outcomes focused, they were just, I'm good at this thing and I want us to get to this accomplishment, this outcome as fast as possible. So I'm going to do the thing I'm already good at. I don't want to learn anything else. I want to do the thing I'm already good at.
Yeah, I understand that. I remember as a young professional getting to the point where I felt like I was really on my feet. I was licensed and I was comfortable because I thought I knew what I was doing. And I remember making a distinct choice to walk into a situation where I wasn't comfortable, co-leading a group of adjudicated sex offenders. And I remember this thing of realizing that some of my colleagues were going to stay in that space forever. They were going to stay right where they were comfortable once they got there, instead of putting themselves in a situation where they just had to step back and be a learner again. Now we have about a minute or two before the break, but do you think curiosity is something that can be learned?
Yes. So a lot of people think of curiosity as a trait. I actually think that as a practice that I liken to meditation. It looks easy, but it's really hard to be still, right? And so with curiosity and practicing curiosity, there are going to be days where it's harder to practice curiosity than other days. If I'm feeling angry and upset and resentful, it's going to be pretty hard for me to be open-minded. So part of that is kind of accepting that. So learning how to practice curiosity is learning to forgive myself too. Like that there are going to be times where I'm feeling a certain way. Right. So, but then that doesn't mean that I shouldn't do it and that I shouldn't try.
Yeah.
So, I do think it, important. And I think the other thing is for people, if they can practice curiosity, which also I boil it down to increasing self-awareness, building relationships across difference, and communicating clearly. If they can practice curiosity, which is in part just, I don't know and I want to learn, it can be contagious because other people are like, oh, they're okay with not knowing. Maybe I can, and especially the leaders. If a leader in a group does that, oh my gosh, the leader is giving permission to other people.
Right, to not know and to be learning. Julie, we're going to take a break now. And when we come back, I want to dive into your book and hear more about that, how you came to it. And I just want people to hear about it. This is Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationship Show. My guest today is Dr. Julie Pham. After the break, we'll be back to continue our conversation.
All clear, ladies.
Every year, Steve Faircal climbs the stairs at the John Hancock Center in Chicago, 94 floors to the top.
It's called the hustle up the Hancock.
It's hard to believe when you watch Steve today that a few years ago, his lungs were failing and he was fighting to survive.
For 8 hours a day, someone was pounding on my chest to try and keep my lungs clear. I honestly don't think I had more than a couple weeks to live.
That's when Steve received the gift of life, a double lung transplant made possible by an organ donor.
After I got my new lungs, I started doing things that I had never been able to do. I never knew that breathing could feel this good.
Steve climbs to honor his donor and to raise awareness for organ, eye, and tissue donation.
Wouldn't you like that when you left this beautiful planet, that you could save a few lives on your way out? It's an incredible gift.
Imagine what you could make possible by leaving behind the gift of life. Learn more and sign up as an organ, eye, and tissue donor. Go to organdonor.gov. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Health Resources and Services Administration.
Hi, tune into my new show, The Remarkable Relationship Show, with me, Mercy Russell. I bring a fresh perspective on all things related to how humans develop their individual brilliance while navigating the excitement, stickiness, and resistance in their relationships. Wednesdays from 9 to 10 a.m. And you can visit my website at leadershipwithmercy.com.
It's time that you are heard, and I don't mean in just a conversation. I mean really heard. Imagine hosting your very own radio program on Alternative Talk 1150. Talk about being heard. Call 425-653-1150 right now to learn how affordable it can be to host your own radio show. Time slots are going fast, so take hold of this chance by dialing 425-653-1150. Alternative Talk. We have an opportunity waiting just for you.
Multicultural, multidimensional even. Alternative Talk 1150.
And we've got to come back here. Sorry about that. Hang tight. Here we go.
So, Remarkable Relationship Show. And I'm here. And here we are. My Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationship Show. I was getting excited about what I was saying. So anyway, we're here with Dr. Julie Pham today. We've been talking about her work, her career in Seattle as a community builder and Vietnamese American woman. And right now we're going to talk about her recently released book, 7 Forms of Respect. So Julie, tell us.
Okay, so here, by the way, this is the cover of the book. And so 7 Forms of Respect, it was influenced by my personal experience as being Vietnamese growing up in the US and having lived in the UK, Germany, France, and Vietnam. It was also influenced by my community building experience, all of what I talked about, those people coming together and little frictions emerging and just, why did they treat me? Why did they say that? And seeing that, I actually then started to get curious, like, well, how do people want to be treated? And so then I started to do formal research, and I started to do focus groups and interviews and questionnaires and ask people, how do you want to be treated? Especially, how do you want to be treated at work? What are your expectations? And Mercy, what people kept saying was respect. I want to be respected. And I was like, okay, well, what does this word respect mean to you? What does it look like? And that's when I saw people had different ideas of what respect. They would describe respect differently. And so that's when it's just like, okay, there are different ways, different kinds of respect. And I started to dig deeper. And you know, a lot of times when people talk about respect, they bring up the golden rule, right? Treat people the way that you want to be treated. And so then it was just, well, what if people don't want to be treated the way you want to be treated?
Right.
And then there's the platinum rule, which is treat people the way they want to be treated. The problem is what if they don't tell you, or what if it changes? And so then I have what I call the rubber band rule. And so in the rubber band rule, what it reflects is we are actually, here's a rubber band, we're actually able to be we're able to stretch, actually. We're able to stretch and to accommodate other people. I think Mercy likes this. I can do that. Okay, well, I'll give Mercy respect in this way. Over time, though, what happens is people, if we do things that we don't like to do because we're trying to be respectful, then what can happen is we will actually get so uncomfortable that we will snap and break like a rubber band. And so what's important to know is, what are my breaking points? What are the things that are going to make me snap? What are the behaviors that are going to make me snap? And so that's why I call it the rubber band rule. It's actually about self-awareness. And so the 7 forms of respect is really a practice in curiosity. And, you know, I think I mentioned that curiosity, it's about increasing self-awareness, building relationships, and communicating clearly. And those are the 3 elements. And so for the 7 forms of respect, it's a way for people to spark conversations. It's not about what do I want? It's about, let me share what I want and let me share why. And I want to understand your why. Because people remember stories. Right. They remember stories. They're not going to go around and okay, Mercy likes this and this. Okay, I have to just remember that. But Mercy, if you share with me why, I'll remember that more. And also, here's the thing: it's in my research, what I realized is respect is dynamic. It's relative. It's subjective. It's personal, right? It's contradictory too. And yet we talk about respect as if it's fixed, as if it's universal. And we just say, I need you to respect me. Well, I am respecting you. No, you're not. Yes, I am. And we kind of go back and forth on that. And so that's why the book is, it's more like 5 love languages, not 7 habits of highly effective people. That's one of the big misconceptions. People think, oh, you're going to tell me how to be respectful. No, I actually think you already know how to be respectful, but maybe you don't know how to describe how you want to get respect. And this can help you articulate that.
Right. Or help others communicate to you how they want to be respected.
Exactly.
Because they may not even know that that's the problem. Right. They might not know. They might say, you know, in their own thinking or understanding, they may not understand that it's really that the problem is that they're not feeling respected. They might think, oh, that person's wrong, or make a judgment about them. But if I'm aware how important respect is and that there's a disconnect here, then I can open a conversation to find out what works for them or what they need to hear. Can you talk? Go ahead.
I draw a difference between, oftentimes when we're not getting respect in the ways that we want, we feel disrespected. And I actually think that there's a difference between disrespect and lack of respect.
Talk about that.
So disrespect is intentional. I know you want this. I know you care about punctuality. So, but I'm going to be late because I'm actually intentionally trying to disrespect you. But if I don't know that you care about that, then it's a lack of respect in the ways that matter to me, and that there's a difference. And oftentimes we go around feeling people are disrespecting us. And I say, like, disrespect actually is intentional, and lack of respect is they didn't know. You didn't have the conversation, or maybe they didn't understand why you prioritize it. Why is it important to you?
Right.
And once they understand, then that can at least open up the conversation of, can I give you respect in the forms that matter to you, or does the situation call for something else? Because we also have to be aware of the context, because we can't always get what we want too, because maybe there's, for example, an emergency room, punctuality is not going to happen in an emergency room, right? It's about who needs the most care, not who showed up on time for their appointment.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's really interesting. Can you talk about the different types of respect that you have an assessment that's in your book, but it's also online, and you help people look at the ways in which, there's sort of different, what do you call them? Different
different forms, different behaviors. And we try, this is a bookmark that tells the 7 forms right here. And the 7 forms are, I like to use the acronym PICCA, PPICCAA. And so it's procedure, punctuality, information, candor, consideration, acknowledgement, and attention. And so what we've learned is that people prioritize certain forms over other forms. They, there are some forms that actually matter to you more than other forms. And there are so many different reasons for that. There's so many different, we belong to multiple cultures, communities, identities at the same time. And all of those things are actually going to influence how we want to give and also get respect. It could be the generation that we grew up in. It could be even Pacific Northwest versus, Mercy, you said East Coast, right? Difference there, right?
And New England.
In New England, New England, right? Right. That there's a difference there. It can even be your birth order. It can even be your religion. There's so many different things. And also, it's not just that because you belong or that you identify as, because I'm Asian American, I'm deferential to my elders. It could be, I grew up with that and now I'm reacting to it. I don't like it. Right. So we can have an experience that we react in opposition to.
Sure. Well. Absolutely.
Yeah. So those are the 7 different forms. And what we try to bring awareness around is, what are the ones that matter to me versus the ones I think should matter to me?
Interesting.
Because we've all been socialized to do certain things, right? It's just like, this is what my parents taught me to do. This is what I was taught as respectful. But so we have these 3, they're the 7 forms, and then there are the 3 dimensions to the forms of respect. The first one is hierarchy. It's about acknowledging power dynamics. Who has more power, equal power, or less power than you? And that's formal and informal. The second dimension is give versus get. What we've discovered is there's a difference between how people like to give respect versus how they like to get respect. Not always, but there can be. So for example, Mercy, maybe you like to surprise people, but you don't like to be surprised.
Right.
You know, when you think about that person who likes to give you unsolicited constructive feedback and tell you how to do your job, but when you do that to them and they're like, hey, you can do your job better this way, they're like, I don't like that. And then that last one is what matters to you, what actually matters to you, what matters to you so much, you will do it even if you know it doesn't matter to other people. Like for me, for example, punctuality is important to me because growing up, my mom was always late picking me up from school. And I felt a lot of anxiety waiting for her. And I felt the school staff was waiting with me. And I said, when I grow up, I'm not going to do that. Punctuality is really important to me because I literally feel anxiety, right? And so someone else could have that same experience and say, what's the big deal? My mom was late, not a problem, right? We can have different reactions to the same experience. And so even though I have friends who are always going to be late, I still tell them I'm going to be late, even though I know they're going to come after me, because it's actually not about them. It's about me. That matters to me so much, but then there are the things that don't matter as much.
Right. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the hierarchy component. I haven't quite grasped that in terms of, I can imagine,
yes.
but I want to hear you talk about it.
Yes. So in the workplace, but even in our personal lives and other places, power dynamics exist. And so the way that we give respect and actually expect to get respect from people who have more power than us can be different from those who have less power and those who are our peers. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. So there's the form of respect of acknowledgement. So that's praise, that's gratitude. And so maybe from my boss, I want to hear that praise. Oh, you're doing a really good job. But coming from someone who reports to me, it may feel ingratiating. It may feel like they're sucking up to me, right? So it's like, why are you telling me that I'm doing a good job, right? And then we all have to make choices at times, right? Because we have to prioritize. So, for example, if I think about as a business owner, I have clients and I have vendors, and so clients are those who actually have more power because I rely on that revenue to support my business. And then vendors, actually, they rely on me. So I actually have more power than my vendors. So if I am going to there are 2 back-to-back meetings, right? Am I going to have a longer, and let's say I'm having a conversation with my client. They're going over, they're talking longer. Right. And am I going to end that meeting? I'm like, sorry, I have a meeting with my vendor. Right. Or am I going to say oh, keep going, client. Right. And so it kind of just explains the choices, because sometimes people may say, oh, I'm being contradictory. And then for other people, they're like, no matter what, punctuality is important to me, regardless of the power dynamics. Or I even remember there was one where it's just someone who was in a very powerful position said, when I was very junior, people were always late to me. And so now I choose to be late to those meetings with my peers, versus I will be more punctual to those who have less power than me than to those who have equal power, because I remember what that was like. And so again, it goes back to the personal explanation. It doesn't dictate it, but it does influence it. And so how do we talk about it?
Great. That's a really good explanation. And I think it makes it more clear to me too, how I think these 3 dimensions are aspects in which the forms of respect can vary for each person. So we only have a few minutes left, but Julie, I'd like you to talk more about what your hope is with your book and about the work you do. I'm assuming you consult with organizations and you help bring this knowledge about communication. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I dream that one day people are going to talk about their forms of respect the way they talk about love languages. Right. And just that even if they never read the book, that they will be able to help understand each other more, and to understand that my perspective and the way I see the world is not the only way. And I want to understand how you see it. And I also want to talk about how I see it with you, so that we can build more connection with one another. I do consult with companies, and I help companies understand and articulate their culture through their forms of respect. So oftentimes people describe their company culture as, oh, we're innovative. They use these big, lofty mission words. And I think it's actually more accurate if we describe the behaviors that are acceptable, right? Is it acceptable to multitask or not? Is it, do you CC everyone on all emails and give open access to all of your employees? Or is it information is transmitted on a need to know basis because it's considered more efficient that way? Right. For people to be able to articulate that and understand that, and to see that there are different levels. That's my dream, that this is a tool that will help people communicate better. And that it'll help organizations and leaders also lead better as well. And for people to learn to be more adaptive. And more understanding and more empathetic and more curious.
Well, I'm looking forward to sharing your work with a number of people I know who are involved in complex organizations. And I can imagine the application of family businesses. So I'm excited about that. Julie, it's time for us to sign off. I want to thank you so much for coming today. I've been with Dr. Julie Pham. She's an entrepreneur who's worked in a number of different fields with her entrepreneurship, and the author of a new book, 7 Forms of Respect, and is an expert in community building and communication in diverse groups, not only ethnically diverse groups, but also industry diverse groups. And I really encourage you to read her book, to look at her website, and to follow up with her work. Julie, I think what you're doing is very innovative, and I have a lot of respect for how you've gotten there, and both academically and in your the rigor of your intellect, and also with your personal experience. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcy.
Okay.